Welcome to Authentic Educators, a podcast by teachers for teachers about best lessons, favorite classroom moments, and strategies you can implement today. Purposeful displays like printouts of current events, character maps drawn on whiteboards, or daily stock market updates posted on the wall can create engagement and authentic conversations. My name is Dave Brown, and in this episode, Cody and I talk about simple ways to create engagement, foster rapport, and connect to the curriculum through engaging classroom displays. Hope you enjoy listening and reach out to us with any ideas you have for creating classroom displays that engage students.
I find when students are sitting in their classrooms, their kids, their minds are going to wander. They're going to look around the room. They're going to look around at their friends. They're going to look out the window. And in today's episode, I really want to highlight some things, Dave, that you do in your classroom and have done in your classroom that allow those moments, which are going to happen, and there's no way to stop them, but to give students the opportunity when their eyes wander to see things that engage themselves with the curriculum in a way that makes them think, makes them wonder, and makes them want to learn. So there were two specific strategies. Let's maybe talk about the one that you did in your former life as an English teacher, which I've done variations of as well. Yep. So I'm curious to see how you made that happen in your classroom.
Thanks, Cody. Yeah, so the two things I'll talk about are all about just engaging classroom displays, and neither one of these ideas is rocket science. Both of them are so easy to implement, and the reality is a ton of teachers probably do versions of these things in a much more aesthetically pleasing and great way. But just the simple way that I did these two things, or do one of them and did the other, still has created or creates great conversations. So in my previous life as an English teacher, one of the most influential books about RELA instruction that I think I read was 180 Days by Kelly Gallagher. And so this idea comes from that book. And Kelly Gallagher is all about giving kids daily time to read books of their choice. And you can modify that to be a couple times a week or whatnot. And so when our ninth grade English curriculum adapted that more explicitly, something I did from 180 Days is on my whiteboard, I put three signs. One sign said previously reading, the other sign said currently reading, and the third sign said reading next. And they were pretty big signs, easy to see. And I would put a physical book on the ledge of the whiteboard right under it, or I'd print it out if it's what I was, like a picture of the cover, if it's what I was currently reading. And it was a great way for me. I'd try to challenge myself every week, at least once per week, to speak for a minute or two about the book that I'm currently reading. Cool. And the connection there was I'd say, hey, look, as an English teacher, I read for pleasure or for information or for self-improvement, and I never have to take quizzes on this or be tested on it. Right. And I was trying to just model, being a curious person and being a reader. And, sometimes over-testing and over-quizzing squeezes the joy out of that. So this was really just me modeling reading for the sakes of reading. And we talked about all the things. I just said some of them. It could be for joy. It could be for information. It could be for learning a specific skill. And what I really liked about this is I'm a big nonfiction reader, and I really enjoy reading either books about self-development or finance or business or psychology or, human behavior. And so it was a way for me to share ideas from books like Atomic Habits or
Malcolm Gladwell, I think was one I saw.
Yeah, you know what?
Together.
Outliers. I loved talking about outliers, for example. And so it was a cool way for me to talk about that type of stuff. And there were times too where I had on my previously read shelf or whatever, it was that the Harry Potter play that had come out. And so
Cursed Child.
Yeah, and so many kids love Harry Potter, so that allowed for just really great rapport building and just great talk about literature or nonfiction or whatever it was. And so that's something I highly recommend any English teacher adapts in their classroom, because it was one of these things that I remember thinking to myself, like, why have I not done this for the previous 9 or 8 or 10 or years of my career? Because it just created such a good connection, not only with me and my students, but also with the idea of reading. Adults read.
Where in the classroom did you find the most effective place for that display where
For me, it was
uh
right in the front. It was like
okay.
it was you looked at the front board and it was off to the left a little bit, so it was prominently displayed. And sometimes it was just like a kid walking in. We'd have a 20-second conversation where a kid would be like, "Oh, The Road, I just read that book," or "Oh, Beartown, I've heard about this," or "What's that? What's this about?" And so it was just a cool way to have books that I was reading at that time and having little conversations about them. So that's my first simple, so easy to implement, and highly recommended
I mean, I think
classroom
that I think
display.
that can be applicable to any grade level in any subject. There's the clear
Yeah, if you're
English
reading,
connection, but if you're a math teacher and it's just a way to engage with students, it's a way to strike up conversation, connect with them. Obviously, be mindful, I suppose, of your grade level that you're
make
in
sure the
there in terms
content's
of
appropriate,
correct.
correct.
But such a great idea, a simple idea that you can implement. So,
I was going to say, I could see a science teacher, if they're a reader, doing the same thing if they just read Contact or something like that, or the book The
mm,
Martian. I'm sure
right.
there's ways to do that, or social study if it's a biography or some sort of historical piece of writing. So I agree that seems like an easy to adapt idea. And
So
then
then, as you transitioned right into business, you were
right,
just telling
and
me before we recorded this really cool concept that
yeah.
I'd love to see. Actually, I kind of visualize it in my mind. But what
And
are you doing with the
so,
stock market in your
yeah, and
finance
so
classes?
for just some like brief context, right? As I've alluded to, I love to read nonfiction. I love to read about business, and I have had for a decade business outside of my teaching career, which is sort of what led me to switch gears, mid-career into teaching business to align day job with night job. But something that I do in the classroom, I'm teaching personal finance predominantly right now. Over 50% of the classes I teach this year are personal finance courses.
What
And
grade are those kids?
it's mixed grade, it's 10th through 12th grades.
Okay.
And so what I've done at the start of this year, I didn't do this last year, but I've been doing it for every course this year, and I've really enjoyed this. Since the first day of school, which was September 3rd this year, I printed out on an 8 by 5 or 8.5 by 11, standard printer piece of paper,
Hmm.
like a stock, like an S&P 500 quote. And if anybody here doesn't know what that is, S&P stands for Standard and Poor's. They're like a stock rating company, and the 500 represents the 500 biggest U.S. Stocks. So
Okay.
when people are talking about how's the stock market doing, most often they're referring to a performance measure, which is the most common one is the S&P 500. And so again, that number that represents the S&P 500 is like an aggregate of the 500 biggest US publicly traded stocks. And
Okay.
so,
So where do you put that paper?
and so what I did is I started on one wall, and I have a big sign that says S&P 500, and I sort of arbitrarily just picked like the middle of the wall and duct taped on one side and slapped it up on the wall, and I have September 3rd's date. I have the number that was, maybe it was like 5,700 or something along those lines, or I think it was a little bit below that maybe, but and I had its price movement and its percentage movement, which I don't remember what it was, but I know it was red that day. So I color the everything red and has like the minus signs because the market
Okay.
was down.
Hmm.
And the first couple days of September there, the market was down. So each consecutive day, I have a new portrait sized piece of paper that I tape a little bit lower as the market went down. But then when the market started to shift and go up, instead of
Mm.
using red ink, there's green ink, and I would post to the wall the piece of paper a little bit higher. And you know what? I'll link a picture in our like episode description so folks
Okay.
can maybe see that. But
Yeah.
um,
So it's a living graph. You're
it's a
you're
living
literally
graph.
creating
It's
that.
updated every single day, and it's now spanning two full walls of my classroom. And it's so cool because kids ask about it all the time, and then once they understand what it is, and once we get to the point in our units where we learn about how the stock market works and what a stock market
That's so
index
cool.
is,
Yeah.
it just leads to all these great conversations, and it also
Hmm.
leads to kids asking like, "Oh, why is it down 2% today? Why is it up 2% today?" Wow, it's really been down this whole week. And then just strangers walking in the room are always intrigued by it too. And it just leads to
Right.
these really small teachable moments, but then the dots get to be connected
Hmm.
when um, just to give brief context, early in the year we talk about interest and compound interest and where can, consumers earn a rate of return, and we start learning about bank accounts and high yield savings accounts. And right now in a high yield savings account, you're doing pretty well if you're earning 3.7%. But then a few weeks later, when kids learn about how the stock market works and how the
Right.
annualized average rate of return of the S&P 500 is roughly 10%, I'm able to point to the wall and be like, look at this, the market's up 1.5% today. That's what a high yield savings account could be up in a whole quarter year. Or
Hmm.
sorry, in half of a year. So in one day, you could make in the stock market what takes you 6 months to make in a savings account. Now, on the flip side, you can also be down in the stock
Right.
market, so it takes
Yep.
risk. But just generally speaking, it's a really fun way to visually track the stock market. It's fun for me too because I take a look at it every day and have fun updating it and printing out and posting on the wall. But
I just think the difference between if I were a student in your classroom, personal finance or whatever the business course you're teaching is, the difference between a blank wall or even, a very Instagrammable, nice posters and decor, atmosphere. Whereas this is an
yeah,
active tool in your classroom that makes the decoration of your room blend seamlessly into the curriculum of your room. And to me, like, I'll be honest, I think in my teaching chops, classroom decor is probably not my strongest suit. And so I have a bit of a jealousy in terms of that. Trying to think of how I could do some version of that in my classroom. And, I just challenge listeners out there to think, whether you're elementary or whether you're secondary, what is it that you're doing in your classroom? And not that you have to like redesign the entire room to be some sort of mini escape room that has theme all over the place, but if you had a particular section in your classroom, and we'd love, for listeners to reach out, right? Authentic ed pod at gmail.com with ideas of something that you've done, to share this with folks. The closest thing that I can think of is the unit that we're currently studying in my seventh grade ELA class with the Parker inheritance. I'm fortunate enough that I have a co-teacher who has a lot prettier handwriting than I do for the whiteboard. So the one giant whiteboard that takes up like the back of the wall, we're keeping a list of all the characters that are present. There's like there's a current timeline, and then there's the timeline in the past. So we have the characters in different sections with connections. And I'll just see the students when their minds start to wander, look up there, and as we're reading, kind of they'll hear a name, they'll look up at the wall, and that's something, I'll be honest, it's really the first year that I've done something like that,
I,
and I'm really glad that I've done it. And it's trying to take that decor of the classroom and blend it with the curriculum.
yeah, and I love that idea, Cody. I was going to say my final little idea here too is I identify with you as well. As if I were to rate myself in terms of classroom decor, maybe 6 out of 10 would be generous. Like by no means do I have the artistic flair or touch with that, but I think it can be compensated for by just having stuff that's purposeful that can lead to
Yes.
engagement,
Yep.
be intentional about it. And sometimes I explicitly refer to it, but other times I let the kids get curious and just a final connection. And then we can close out here. Thinking back to when I taught Romeo and Juliet, there was nothing special about this. Again, going back to teaching ninth grade for the majority of my English teaching career. Something I always did was in different colors on the whiteboard as we progressed through the play. I would write in one color Montague, and on the opposite side, I'd write the word Capulet. And as we
Mm-hmm.
got introduced to characters, I'd make the sort of family tree and make the character connection with the arrows and labels.
Yep.
And I would always have one specific color for one family, another specific color for the other. And I'd have fun drawing little doodles like
Or maybe you could
swords.
have a kid draw the doodle, right?
Well,
Have like an
that
artistic kid.
that certainly is what happened, yeah, and
Yeah.
so kids got involved. I was gonna say, you'd have little stick figure Tybalt and Benvolio fighting, and then when I'd have characters like the prince, who was non-aligned, really, he'd be a totally third, separate color,
Right.
and
Right.
I would normally color Mercutio as both the whatever color I chose for the prince because he's related to him, and also there would be blended of whatever color the Montagues were since he's Romeo's best friend. But
Yeah.
anyway, hopefully this episode just gets folks out there thinking about purposeful but easy ways to create engagement with whatever their classroom displays are. And again, little disclaimer: I am by far not the world's best expert on this, but I think that if I can do it, so can anybody else. So
Absolutely.
Cody, why don't you take us out?
Yeah, thanks for listening. If you have ideas that you'd like to share, whether they're elaborate or straightforward, again, our email is authenticedpod@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening to Authentic Educators, a podcast for teachers by teachers about best lessons, favorite classroom moments, and strategies you can use today. We look forward to chatting with you next time.